Hello, welcome back everyone to EdUp Edge, where we like talking about all things career education, leadership, which is a very hot topic nowadays, and life hacks. We also like to talk about trending topics, and I am your host, Kathy Belletti. It's not very often where you get to see an entire school in one person, where you have admissions and then academics and career services. The only thing missing is financial aid, right, Veronica?
And registrar. Yeah.
Registrar, right? Well, you know what? Let's welcome Miss Veronica Castellanos.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so she is the Assistant Director of Career Services with Carrington College. Hey, Veronica, how are you doing today?
I am surviving this heat wave. Doing
Oh,
good.
my God. You know what? Honestly, I can say this week is actually better than last week. Over here, we're in like the high 70s. Last week was like 95 and up.
Yeah. We're feeling the heat. I think yesterday, here in Pleasant Hill, it reached over 100. So it's we're feeling the heat.
My gosh. And you know, when it's winter, then we complain about how cold it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Veronica, it's definitely a pleasure having you here today. I always like to start off asking, how did your background get started in higher education? Because the stories vary. Okay, so talk to us about how your journey started.
Yeah, if you would have told high school Veronica that this is where I would have landed, I would have laughed in your face. I would have never believed you because I was a consistent C 2.0 average student. So I started my journey here because I was giving great customer service in my role in a sales role at a hotel.
Mm.
Yes. So I started in legacy education, High Desert Medical College in Lancaster, and I was introduced to some of the leadership through this hotel job. They would check in, they would check out. And at one point, I was like, what do you do? Like, tell me what you do. Like, because I would see in their profile, it would say High Desert Medical College. And I
Mm-hmm.
was so intrigued. And they started talking to me about it. I was like, that's so interesting. And at one point, I was like, well, are you hiring?
Hey.
And they actually said, not right now, but I'll keep you in mind. And a couple weeks later, they asked me to apply. I went through a rigorous interview process, and the rest is history.
Get out. So you were working in a hotel. What were you doing at a hotel?
I was part of their marketing team, so I would market to big groups so
Uh-huh.
that we could have like big groups
Yeah.
stay at the hotel, take up a block of rooms. That hotel also had meeting rooms, so I
Mhm.
would go to like bridal shows to have them like come book
Oh,
the meeting for any of their bridal parties, baby showers. I would actually do outreach to businesses to see if they wanted to use our meeting rooms as their meeting rooms. So, being where I am now, kind of full circle. I'm not a shy person. I like being out there. I love building rapport, and it makes sense why I'm in the role I'm in now.
it also makes sense why you started off in admissions.
Yes,
Let
yes.
me ask, is there anything in your free time that you do now that really connects to why you like working with students so much?
Yeah, so in my education, like my personal education history, I'm a
Mhm.
psychology major. I was so intrigued with my journey into High Desert Medical College and understanding the mindset of the student, because like I said, I was a 2.0 student. I
Mhm.
was I was not I was not academically a superstar.
Right.
So in my admissions process, I saw the drive that the community had to do better, and I saw the need because four-year college was not in the books for these students. The
Mhm.
majority of the students were just like me, and we actually implemented the Pacific Institute. I don't know if anybody is familiar with it, but they go into how we think, why we think the way we think, and how our previous history in our education affects wanting to pursue further education, even if it's a 9-month program, right? So that really intrigued me to go back to school and get my associate's degree in psychology, and that really drives me. That introduced me to different books. That introduced me to podcasts. That introduced me to just leadership out there that talks about mindset and why we get on our own way. And I use that knowledge to help our students. I used it back then in admissions, and I use it now because, as we know, the student life cycle comes full circle, and when they're ready to go out there to work, now that negative self-talk comes in, right? I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I don't think they want me. And then they get in their own way and they don't show up to interviews, right? So I ask questions, I get curious, and I feel like that makes me really strong in my ability to help the students get to their final goal, right? I like to tell the students when they're ready to go out to extern, we do like a little externship orientation. And I'm like, who raise your hand if you signed up to take on X amount of dollars in loans for a hobby? Nobody raises their hand,
Wow.
right? We didn't sign up for a hobby. I'm not here because you signed up for a hobby. I'm here because you want a career and I'm going to help you get there. Let's
Exactly.
get through externship first, right?
Wow. Wow. This is why we connect, because I know we both listen to Ed Milet a lot.
That's right.
And
That's right.
he
Yeah.
talks about mindset. There's two people that I listen to almost every day. Dr. Darius Daniels, who's an excellent communicator, and Ed Milet, he just gives it to you raw,
Yeah.
just as you need to hear it. And it's so inspirational. Yeah, I love the fact that really that you were that type of student, because I feel like nowadays students don't really have much advisors that can relate to them. A
Right.
student goes to school and they're automatically assuming that you're at this high caliber, and there's a disconnect there, right? Until you
Yeah.
get to the point where it's like, look, I was a student just like you. Now they start to feel like, okay, somebody actually understands, what I'm actually
Exactly.
going through. So let's talk about
Yeah.
admissions, because as that's one of both of our favorite topics. Okay.
Absolutely.
I want to know, how do you go from admissions to academics to career services? How did that even happen?
Yeah, so I've been an Ed Milet fan for the longest time. I have been listening, all of that. I've actually seen him live, speak live. So
Really?
yes, that's how much I love him. Shout out to Ed Milet.
Jealous of
Yeah.
that. Right?
Um, right. Uh, so because of my really strong inclination and this
Mhm.
positive growth mindset, when High Desert Medical College introduced the Pacific Institute, they kind of chose me as the co-facilitator for the curriculum, which means
Oh.
I started dabbling between admissions and going into what they call Career Development 100.
Hmm.
So their version of CD 100 career development, it starts with the mindset, and it's the first class that the students take before they go into their core classes. So we really hit them hard with belief system. They actually have an acronym called HABE, HABE, habits, attitudes, beliefs, and expectations. So we would talk about that before they entered their core classes, and what are those habits, beliefs, expectations, attitude that we need to be that student that we want to be,
Yeah.
right? And the same thing, I would ask a question: who in here wants to be an A student? Right?
Mhm.
Everybody's hands go up. Who in here, close your eyes, who in here is an A student? A lot of hands would come down, right? And it's
Mhm.
not because we're not capable, it's not because we don't want to, it's because we have to revisit the mindset, and we have to revisit the beliefs in order to build the habits, in order to have that attitude, right? And I would bring in my story. I am a 2.0 student when I was in high school, right? And how can you build up when you want to do something? You're going to go do it a lot better than if you have to do something, right? So that transitioned me into the co-facilitator for that. And then at a certain point in my journey with Legacy, I was the corporate director of the career development and professional development. So that got me to oversee the 5 campuses and their career development classes, their professional development classes. So I had a staff of instructors that I was leading, and my main job was to help these students get through the initial class. Because as we know, in admissions, we have 7 days, right? And that was this class, that was 7 days. If they dropped within these 7 days, then it was a lot harder to get them back,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of my work was to go in there and train the instructors to get the student to believe in themselves through this curriculum. And a lot of the students loved the curriculum. They absolutely were 100% in, and we were able to identify like the ones that didn't want to turn on their camera. You know, what is going on? Is this
Mhm.
something that we need to give additional resources? Do we need to encourage them to come in and use our computer lab,
Yeah.
right? It really helped us. And because I had admissions background, being in this role, I understood the importance of why we had to have the student complete this class and have that confidence to move on. And then I was able to also get the knowledge behind the scenes of what happens in academics. Why do we have retention? Why is it important? I was then a sort of a resource to be able to tap back into that student and say, hey, remember when you said you wanted to do this for your kids? Let's help you build those habits. What happened? What's going on? Right? I would redirect to student services. Sometimes they just needed some time with us, the student service advisor, to come up with a game plan to time manage the time to
Mhm.
study, right? So, you know, coming back around full circle, now I'm in career services and I'm at the end of the life cycle of the student.
Yep.
And all of that builds up to be able to assist and give the services that the students need.
You know what? I think, first of all, you were like the star employee that needs to be copied in every single school, right? But
Right.
that first class, I think it's critical that every school should implement that. Because in admissions, we always talk about those false beliefs, right? I've been in school for 10 years. Am I going to be successful? You know, I'm working part time. Am I going to be able to afford my tuition? But I feel
Mhm.
like in admissions, it's like a hot point that's touched on, and then it's never revisited again. Right. So now
Right.
students have this picture in their mind that, all right, once I get started, everything is going to be smooth sailing. And it's really not. I was a DOA at a school in Melville, Long Island, and we used to have a map in the
Mhm.
hallway when we took student tours. And what it was like, this is just starting point. But there were different sections of the map where it would paint a picture of when the student starts to feel discouraged and wants to quit.
Mhm.
So that students see from the very beginning, okay, along my journey, it's not going to be smooth. There's going to be times where I feel like quitting. Okay, but I need to go back to my why and my story, and that's going to keep me going. And I feel like a lot of schools, they've kind of strayed away from the mindset when it comes to
Right.
students.
Yeah, I think it's important to set the expectation because we have all this data now, all of this data that can help us build that roadmap
Mhm.
and lean on the data. Like, hey, based off of what we know, students struggle in this module or this cohort. So I want you to be prepared. This is your academic coach. This is where she's at. This is where she or he resides. This is how they're going to help you, right? If you can't get a hold of them, I'm always here, right? We know that the students, when the rapport is built with the admissions enrollment services rep,
Mhm.
they will continue to come back to that rep. And that person is so important in the life cycle of the student because when academics needs to reach out to enrollment services or admissions, the rapport was built and we can reconnect, right? Um, when career services can't get them to answer, right? It's like who was the first thing I do is look at who enrolled them and
Exactly.
like, hey, so and so, tell me about this student, right? Because I want to know, why did they want to chase this in the first place? Why did they want to start education in the first place? Because now I can come back and have a little bit more in my toolbox to be able to help.
Mhm. You know what, Veronica, it's really sad to say there's a lot of broken schools out there. I've worked with a lot of schools who, once the enrollment happens and the first day of class comes, once those students, clock in or they sign in for the first day of class, some of these schools, they do not want admissions communicating with these students at all,
Wow.
because it's right back to numbers. We need you to start building for the next class. And it's like,
Mhm.
admissions has the story. They have the relationship. The trust is built with them. And I find that the schools who understand this and understand how there has to be synergy between each team, those are the schools that survive, right? Because if
Absolutely.
you're in academics and a student is out for 5 days, they can just go right back to admissions and say, tell me about this person's story. Because the admissions
Yeah.
advisors can say, you know what, they were having some issues at home. I 100% believe that's the reason why that student has disappeared. But so many departments are disconnected.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's in the training, and
Mhm.
when our heart is in it as the admissions enrollment services person, when our heart is in it, we get curious, we ask those questions, and that's where we build rapport. But when the heart's not in it and you're just seeing that potential student as a potential number for you to hit goal, that's where the disconnect happens, and you're not going to be successful. Yeah, you might be good on the phones, getting on there, making the dials. You might be good at setting
Exactly.
the appointment,
Mhm.
but the longevity of that student, there's a disservice that is done, because when that student walks out of our school, they're going to feel that they weren't serviced correctly, especially when you have those enrollment services or admissions people that their heart is in it and they're like comparing. Wait a minute, how come these other students have a relationship with their enrollment services, but I don't?
Mhm.
Right? And what ends up happening is they start following the students to go to that enrollment services person
Yeah.
that does build rapport, that has the candy bowl out, that gets them to come in, and
Yeah.
guess who's enrolling them for their associate's degree?
There
Or
you
guess who is building the relationship afterwards and giving them high fives and, you know, being really bought into their experience.
Yeah. It,
So when someone has the thought process
mhm.
or wants to go into enrollment services, I think the first part is really checking, are you invested here or are you just invested here?
Mm. Listen, okay, first of all, this topic is so loaded because I meet with so many different types of advisors. And you have the old school advisors who are still floating around where it's like, this is a numbers game. All right, I need to make my numbers. So I understand this person may not be a good fit for this program, but whatever, I don't want my DOA breathing down my neck. Right. But then you have
Mhm.
other advisors who are getting dinged because they're taking too long on the phone, they're taking too long in an interview. And it's like, you can't put every student in a box because some people are going to take a
Mhm.
little longer. And if we want to train to one student at a time, it has to be one situation and one circumstance at a time. And then you have advisors
Yeah.
who don't understand that certain questions need to be asked. So you would hear
Mhm.
someone say something really critical and they just glaze over it and go to the next question. And then you would
Yeah.
ask, didn't you hear what they just said about how they have to get out of this situation? Why didn't you ask about that? I didn't know that I could. I thought I would be going too deep.
I
No, you
okay, so absolutely.
don't
I I
know.
actually get that even in career services, right? Like my team will go, well, like, why do we need to ask that, right? Or and I'm
Mm,
like, listen, it's all about active listening.
yes.
We just did an exercise today actually on the career
Uh-huh.
planning meeting, and I was the student. I had a rep be the rep. And I think I went through and I said, like, oh, yeah, I did my externship at Sutter and I was family medicine and I worked with kids and I loved it. And then when we went into the job searching portion, we skipped. the pediatrics medical assistant job. And I was like, that's so important because I said I loved working with kids, right? I'm like, you have to build that rapport. The listening needs to be there because if I'm saying, yeah, I have twins at home, I need to be able to get there, how can you make that connection? You have twins? Wow, how old are they? You have to have that piece, whether it's career services or admissions, because every puzzle piece counts towards the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture? It's having them out there successful being employed. Again, we didn't sign on the dot for a hobby. We
Mhm.
signed on the dot to change our lives. And if you're telling me you have children, ask, how old are they? Oh, that's such a great age, right? Tell me how they play a role into your education. Oh, well, I'm going to be going to school when they're in school. I love that. That's great. When are you going to do homework? Are you going to do it with them or after they go to bed? Right? You have to get them to paint that picture of what life is going to look like. Because
Mhm.
when they're sitting in enrollment services, they're excited. They're so excited they can ride that excitement wave. But once they're in and they don't make it that 7 days because
Mhm.
life is hitting them, enrollment services should have done the painting the picture of what it's going to look like and
Absolutely.
understood where the hiccup was going to be because you already know that second that they drop in that cancellation period, you thought you had 10, now you have 5.
Hello.
And and what happened,
Oh my
right?
gosh. Listen, I'm going to come right back to that. I feel like sometimes admissions personnel, they're talking to students with the end in mind, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of times when they're speaking with students on the phones, their goal is I need this person to show up for the appointment because if my director comes around and I don't have 5 names listed for tomorrow, I'm going to get dinged, right?
Right.
If you're interviewing a student, they're like, oh my gosh, I need this person to enroll because when Friday comes and I don't have 5 or 6 enrollments, I'm going to get dinged. But what they don't understand is that middle piece, right, is missing. That's what leads to the appointment show. That's what leads to the enrollment. But then we really
Mhm.
can't blame them all the time because if they're not given the tools to understand how this is done and it's just
Yeah.
a number implanted in their minds, then that's all that they're going to concentrate on, right? But admissions, what are some of the challenges that you've seen when you were in the admissions, a part of the admissions team?
I think you just said it right now. I think that it's important to train to numbers because numbers are data.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the data is so crucial and important, but there needs to be a balance and training to the heart as well, right? Because okay, we have numbers, we have to understand the numbers. We really have to peel back the onion to
Mm-hmm.
understand what is happening, and the data is going to show what it's going to show. But if we train to the heart with the numbers, then we really have a strong student sitting in the seat, right? Because the end goal for admissions is to get the butt in the seat, right? For lack of better terms. But the goal of the institution is to have that graduation rate,
There you go.
right? And if that graduation rate is not there, and then the placement rate is not there, then why are we inflating certain seats on day 1 to 7, right? Like the success needs to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that as an admissions person, enrollment services, that's where you really start going, like the aha moment of like, this is why we need to build rapport,
Mm-hmm.
right? And training to what it define build rapport. Because it's like it's a word, sounds great, but what is that? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Right? Um, I think the beauty about me was that I had a sales background, so I understood that, and I wasn't in car sales, so I wasn't like that person that was, I wasn't that person, but I understood what closing meant, which is why I was successful in admissions. But not everybody has that background,
Yeah,
right? Sometimes we hire people with a counseling background. What is the difference between counseling and really what is admissions and enrollment services, right?
exactly.
So really, really driving hard numbers go hand in hand with training heart and understanding that rapport.
I think there needs to be more cross training too, right? Because admissions people, they always complain. If anything goes left in the school, is always admissions' fault. You have
Right.
financial aid, they're like, what are you doing? The instructors are pissed off because they're like, what am I really supposed to do with this student? And then we have
Mm.
career services who is like, how am I supposed to place this person, right?
Yeah.
But when you talk about admissions, I think this is one area where they have to have the end in mind, right? When you're talking to any student, you have to think about all of the other departments. Okay.
Yeah.
Is this person going to be in a situation where they're not going to be able to make it through because they don't have enough funding right now? They're not even working, they have no support. Are the instructors going to be struggling trying to teach the student, and our career service is going to be pulling their strands of hair out saying, how am I supposed to find work? And I think everyone is
Mhm.
moving so quickly that in so many cases, one team is not considering the other. So, what are
Yeah.
some of the pet peeves that you actually face in career services?
Yeah, I think, because I was in admissions, they're not necessarily my pet peeves, more like pet peeves I've heard,
Uh-huh.
right? So it is like, I think it's so important to acknowledge that the students that are hitting our school systems are high school COVID students.
Mm.
So what I'm seeing a lot of is this very reserved, shy candidate, right? Almost to the point where some of the social skills aren't there, which means when
Yeah.
I send them out to interview, they're either not showing up because they're so nervous talking themselves out of it, or they're bombing the interview, right? So setting the expectation is so important. But I also hear a lot of like, how am I supposed to market this? Right? Well, but then me being in the seat I am, then I'm like, well, did you talk to your student? Did you tell your student? Did we do the workshops? Right? All of that. Um, I also hear a lot of so within financial aid, it's um, the student's not working. Okay, they're not working. That's why they're looking at financial aid. But just because they're not working doesn't mean that they're disqualified or that they're not looking for a
Hmm.
position to help them supplement income,
Yeah.
right? So I think when we all get stuck in our roles and only see ourselves as that point of contact for that one job that we currently have, we don't see the student and find the resources that the
Yeah.
student is looking for.
Yeah, that is so true. I used to sit in career services workshops,
Mhm.
sometimes helping out the deans. And what was really funny, I used to sit in a workshop where they would be talking about bad habits, breed bad habits. And it was always one student who was always on their cell phone, and they're like, no, but when I get hired, this is not going to happen. And it's like, you have to start practicing now. Long
Yeah.
story short, that same student, she was sent out on an internship or externship, is what we call them. And guess what? The very first couple of days, the doctor called complaining this student is always on her cell phone. And she didn't realize that those habits just carried her right into externship. And, of course,
Mhm.
she did not get the job because, sometimes a lot of students get hired from their externship, but the doctor didn't even want her to come back. He was like, send me somebody else.
Yeah.
And I feel your pain because so many people, when they look at career services, they're like, Well, don't they just have to call a bunch of facilities, get them contracted, interview a couple
Right.
of students and prepare them? And it's like, no, the role is so much more. Walk us through what you actually do in career services so that other people and other teams will understand your pain as well.
Yes. A big part is calling employers and understanding the needs of the employer and getting through to the employer, because a lot of the times they have been burnt in the past by bad students, bad schools, inappropriate situations, right? So getting through and finally getting them to believe in me and the product that I have, and
Mm-hmm.
then hearing the voicemail of, well, you vouched for this student and they didn't show up.
Yeah.
So, right. And it's like, man, what happened? Right. Getting them to buy back into picking up our phone call. Right. So it's so important to talk to the student about the expectations and who we're looking for them to become in
Yeah.
this 9 months, 2 year, however long they're here. Because at the end, the employers are looking for a specific candidate, right? And every time I'm on the phone with an employer, I maybe a few times they've told me about technical skill, but a lot of the time it's like, tell me who your most perfect candidate is. Someone that's here on time, that's not going to call out, someone, right? It's all of these soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yes.
is that is where like the cream is at, right? That's the bread and butter of this. It's soft skills, which is what I think right now, the generation that we are working with, they were not given as many soft skills because they are COVID students.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to be impacted by these COVID learners for years to come. So, how do we prepare for that? And it is making those contacts and setting the expectation from the beginning and throughout their education. You know, I go into the workshops and I tell the students, I am not seeing you as a medical assistant student. You are a medical assistant in training.
Mm.
This is education. You're being graded, but you are a medical assistant in training. And I'll ask them, how many of you have ever worked with a manager in training? Yeah, me. Yeah, me. Okay. Same thing. You're a
Yeah.
dental assistant in training, right? Because when they think student, they think they have to act like a student. But when they think I'm
Yeah.
already a fill in the blank, medical assistant, dental assistant, whatever, in training, now I'm thinking like that. And now it's a
Exactly.
lot easier for me to believe that I am that when I am done with my program.
Absolutely. It goes right back to the mindset, right? You know, they always say when you're trying to get to the next level, start thinking like you're already there. You know, years ago when I was first a DOA, I was just a senior advisor at the time, and I knew my goal was to eventually have my own team. So I went to my
Mhm.
director. I was like, "Hey, can I start running this meeting? Can I do the training this week? Can I run the sticks meeting?" All the other seniors, no one was interested in that stuff because they wanted it by title, but I really wanted to make an impact. So I started
Right.
asking to take on these roles. So now when I
Yeah.
did transition, it was easy because I was already doing it. And one thing that you said that was very, very, it stood out throughout this entire conversation is setting the expectation. You know, from
Mhm.
admission, set the expectation. If I'm going to recommend you for this program, this is what I'm looking for, you know, and
Yeah.
then financial aid, set the expectation, academics, and then career services. They've heard it so many times. They're like, I get
Yeah.
it. I do not want to
Yeah.
make this school look bad. And most
Mhm.
importantly, I actually want to succeed. You know,
Yeah.
it's so critical. And I just think that more schools need to implement, you know, this type of thinking when it comes to their students and staff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when the students go out there to do their internships or externships,
Mm-hmm.
the name on their scrubs is what they're representing,
Yeah.
right? And is that going to be positive, negative? We don't know. Are we just throwing something out there, closing our eyes, hoping it sticks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we have a student that's going to go out and represent us well, we feel a lot more confident in
Yeah,
ourselves and our ability to provide services to employers, right? So building up the student is really what we're in the business of doing,
absolutely.
right? And we have students of all kinds of walks of life,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not always doing that to every student. We have students that come in here and they know what they're made of, and they flaunt it, they walk confidently. And I'm like, all right, yes, job made
Use
easy
that.
because I know you're confident. But going back, we don't always serve those type of students. The students
Yeah,
that we serve are the underserved, which means we got a little bit of our job cut out for us, and we have to make the connection, and we have to be curious about who they are so that they can be curious enough to pick up our phone call.
absolutely. Especially since the Gen Z, they have a lot of phone anxiety in the first place. But this also needs to be, talked about from the very beginning when it comes to advisors. Because I always hear advisors say, "Oh my gosh, this student doesn't know what they want," and I'm like, that's 95% of the people that you speak to. Okay. The
Right.
lowest hanging fruit is the one that calls in. They're like, yeah, I already know what this is. I know what the cost is. I know what I want to do. Sign me up. When do classes start? How often does that
Hmm.
happen? Not very often. So I think
No.
advisors have to understand from the very beginning, your role is to convert and inspire the underserved. Okay. So it's a
Hmm.
lot of work just to convert one student.
Yes.
Let me ask you, Veronica, if you had to do this all over again, would you choose the same path?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I absolutely love what I do. It
Yeah.
is so rewarding.
Hmm.
In admissions, it was about seeing them graduate.
Yeah.
In academics, it was about seeing the light bulb go off. And in
Mm,
career services, it's about the phone call when they tell me they've been hired, right?
that's awesome.
I'm getting chills just to tell you, like, I love what I do. Are we gonna have difficult students? Yes,
Absolutely.
everybody's gonna have difficult customers,
Hmm.
right? But you have more of the success than you do the difficult,
That's so true.
right? I would do it again 1,000% every single time the same way I've done it. Um, Being in the field that I am, serving the students that I serve, it definitely has changed my legacy for my children and what I want for them to achieve. And it even inspired me to go back to school,
Nice.
right? I probably wouldn't have gone back to school if it wasn't for being in this field. Because
Wow.
I was that student again, the 2.0 student. And I'm the middle child, by the way, in my family
Me
dynamic.
too. We always
Okay.
get the short end of the stick.
Yes. The only way I got attention was for bad grades, like so so it's like it's so rewarding to be here, and the people that get to feel what I feel are the
Mhm.
people that stay in it for the long run to have those feelings. Because it if you're in admissions and you're like, I'm done, this isn't for me, and you're
Yeah.
gone in 6 months, you never even got to experience your first set of students
Yeah.
graduate.
Yeah.
So it's all about listen, this is worth it, right? This is worth it. Just wait until you're in graduation and they say, Miss Veronica helped me, right? Like, just wait till they name drop you in their
You
speech and
know?
you're like, yeah, like it feels so good. Or when graduation is happening and they come find you because they want a picture with you,
Yep.
right? And you're like, I know I'm doing something right,
Mhm.
you change the lives of these people and their legacy
Yes.
forever,
Yes.
forever. Like it, yeah. It's so rewarding to be in this field.
And you know what? That's one thing that has always, caught my attention and had me attached to this industry, even though right now what I'm doing is pouring into, admissions leaders and advisors. But it was the fact that everywhere I went, all I saw was my student. I'm on the train. They're like, hey, Miss Kathy, do you remember me? I'm working at this place. I'm in church, and the person in front of me recognizes my voice. And it's like, I can't get away from these people, but for great reasons, you know? And I think that's what keeps a lot of people, well, the ones who are here for the right reasons, that's what keeps them attached to this industry. Really seeing the end results and seeing a student who came in and they had no idea what their outlook was going to be, and then actually seeing them graduate and they get out there and they're providing for themselves and their family. That's what it's supposed to be about, you know? But do you have any final thoughts for our listeners, Veronica?
Yeah, I think it's so important to finish off with, if you're in enrollment services or you're thinking about doing enrollment services, anything in admissions, it's so important to know who your resources are and to lean on the resources, right? When you have a student that's not quite sure, who is that academic leader for you to help, right? Or if they're not quite sure because of job insecurity, go talk to your career services person. Let them do some of that talking. And when you have someone that's seasoned in their field, they're going to help you close that student because their best interest is to have that student start, right? Admissions has such a big play on bringing in the student and having, I always, when my team would complain in the past about, why would they even enroll this student? One of my biggest things was like, well, would you like a paycheck this upcoming Friday? Because the student is what builds the school. And would you like a raise at the end of the year? It's like we forget that our customer is the student, and we have to serve with that in mind, right? We are in the business of servitude. Admissions, financial services, career services, services. We are here to serve our students. And when you can do it to the best of your capability and ask questions and ask for help, we're serving our students correctly.
Absolutely. Veronica, I could talk to you all day about these topics. You were definitely an amazing guest. It was great conversing with you. There's so many critical topics and, so many pointers that you gave that can really, transition the school to the next level, but ultimately it starts with serving. And the more we're able to get more people to understand that this is a service, I think the communication is going to be different at every single level. And so thank you so much for joining me today, Veronica, on EdUp Edge. I think we need to get a live event in here somewhere, or you can come back for another episode because this is a loaded topic and, we could go a lot of different directions.
Yes, we can.
Absolutely. But it's been an absolute pleasure. And I thank you guys for joining us once again on EdUp Edge. EdUp out. Take care. I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. I have been working diligently to bring awareness to career schools. There's so much that they have to offer our students and our community. Every single role within the admissions process is critical, whether you're a part of the admissions team, financial aid, career services, academics, everyone deserves a voice. Admissions is the first point of contact for your school, so you want to ensure that you have a team who exudes confidence, passion, and a clear understanding of effective communication with our potential students. I totally understand the pain of missed class starts, low appointment and enrollment conversions, and this is why I created Next Level Admissions Training by Motivate with K.A.T. This platform is a step-by-step process, and it is going to train your new and tenured advisors in every single step of the enrollment process to ensure that our students are inspired, and they're ready and prepared to start class. Admissions is not easy. It can be very challenging, but it's definitely worth it. So if you're ready to take your school to the next level, head on over to lessons.motivatewithkat.com and check out Next Level Admissions.